thank you everyone for joining tonight's Lean Into Allyship event. We're very excited to have a special guest on here tonight. And really the event is, again, there's more to Black history than a month. So as we talk about this, we want to make sure, again, that we're focusing on it being more than just a month of celebrations or attention. And how does that play out for the entire year? But like I said, we do have special guest Dr. G coming back with Dr. Greene as well. And we'll introduce both of them in just a minute. But I just wanted to kick off a few housekeeping things tonight. So we did turn off the chat function, as we always do, so that Don can be providing resources via the chat as we're talking through things throughout the event. But please enter things throughout the Q&A. So as Dr. Greene and Dr. G are talking, please enter those questions as soon as you have them, because we typically ask them primarily in the order in which they come in. And we want to make sure that we do have about 20 minutes set aside at the end of the event to get to your questions as well. You've also likely heard us advocate in the past to strongly consider donating to Nehemiah. There's a lot of work that goes into putting these events together, be it behind the scenes to make this happen. And we cannot and do not expect them to put this on for free for us to educate us. And when you donate, also look into the company match that you work for. See if you can maximize the dollar if they have a contributing match policy as well. If this is your first event, just wanted to let you know, we will send out the resources shared in chat. This will be recorded. It is being live streamed on Facebook. So if you want to watch it again, it will always be available to you in real time. And it will also go to Justified Anger's YouTube page. So please just take the information in. Don't worry about taking as many notes tonight. Ask your questions and be fully present. That is our ask of you tonight. So without further ado, I want to jump right in and want to introduce Dr. G. So for those who have not attended before, he is the president, the founder, and the visionary for the nonprofit Nehemiah. And the vision of his organization is engaging the greater Madison community to empower African-American individuals, families, and communities to bring about hope, transformation, and justice. And he has 35 plus years in this space of serving as an advisor to leaders all across the world. And his efforts definitely include educating, coaching, and mobilizing would-be allies. And that is the entire focus of this Lean Into Allyship series. And I'll let you introduce Dr. Greene a little bit more, Dr. G, but he is an associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin, for those who may have heard us talking about the weather down there. And his research examines the relationship between educational leadership, schools, and neighborhood communities with a focus on racial and educational equity. And we're extremely excited and privileged to have both of you here tonight. And so Dr. G, I'll turn it over to you. If you want to, elaborate a little bit more on how you actually know Dr. Greene and kind of that relationship, and we'll jump into the conversation.
Definitely. Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to our first Lean Into Allyship of the year. So happy New Year. And I'm just excited that we're able to do this. I want to say that we wouldn't be able to pull this off if it weren't for the friends from Generator, if it weren't for Daniel and for AJ and for Samantha and others. And so I just want to show my appreciation to them. And then Don Thornton, who is my executive administrator, who will be dropping key links into the chat room. I'm just appreciative because it takes a lot of people to pull this together. I want to talk a little bit about Dr. Terrance Greene. He's an associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy. He co-directs Texas Principals Leadership Academy, which has a strong focus on preparing anti-racist and equity-centered school leaders. Very important work. Professor Greene has also served as a visiting professor in the Summer Principals Academy at Teachers College of Columbia. And he is a former high school science teacher. He holds a PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a BS from an HBCU, historically Black College and University, Kentucky State University. And he's also the creator of the Racially Just Schools podcast. And we'll drop that a little bit later. But I'm excited that he is on. So please help me welcome Dr. Terrance Greene. I'll also just say I met Dr. Greene when he was a groomsman in a wedding that I was officiating in Detroit. And so one of his best friends from childhood was also a member of our church. He played for Wisconsin football back in the 2000s. And we ended up sitting near each other at dinner, at the rehearsal dinner, and we connected. And he called me up a few years later and say, guess what? I'm in Wisconsin. I'm getting a PhD at UW-Madison. I'm not a teacher anymore. I'm coming to get my doctorate. I want to do some other things. And we've been connected ever since. He's a brilliant scholar, thoughtful researcher. I ended up officiating at his wedding about 9 years ago, and he has two beautiful daughters and a baby on the way. And so, Dr. Greene, man, I'm so glad to have you here. Welcome to Lean Into Allyship.
Thank you so much, Dr. G. I'm honored to be here, and thank you for everybody who's holding space with us tonight.
Yes, man. So listen, we got some interesting things that we want to talk about. Hold on, I just want to pull up my screen so I can look at that. But, this is the last week of January. We just celebrated King. And so for us, we know we're about to get down into Black History Month. And it's something that we like to, we like to celebrate, we like to uphold, but we also want to make sure that people understand that it's not just for Black people. We want non-Black people to study this as well. Hold on, getting all my screen stuff together. Here we go.
Oh, you're good.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And so Dr. Greene, I just want to remind you that this is just casual space. These are folks who tune in because they really want to hear real talk. So you can just take any gloves off. You can, we can just talk really honestly about what's going on. But I will just say this, man. You and I both love Black history, and it really is U.S. history. Just to call it Black history makes it seem like it's something that's just tangential and is not a part of the makeup of this country. But I got to say, I never thought I would see an assault on the teaching of history, of accurate history that includes the experiences and the treatment of Black people in this country the way we do. It's being marginalized by calling it CRT. And tonight's topic isn't about that. But I'm just thinking in the academy, you're up close on this. Are you shocked at just what I just call the ignorance around people just trying to not only hide our history, make it almost illegal to talk about it?
Well,
is that surprising to you?
Well, first, again, I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. G, and just got the utmost respect for you as a person and the work that you've been doing at FOL and Nehemiah. So again, so happy to be in this space. But for sure. Am I surprised? Not at all. I mean, because a historical analysis will tell you that this country loves white history more than it loves Black people, right? So anytime you are infringing upon white history, making of myths and assumptions and stereotypes, there's always an assault to attack that. And here's the thing, Pastor G, even when we started talking about the critical race theory thing, people are up in arms about a theory that explains racism more than they are about doing something to dismantle racism. You know what I'm saying? So think about it, like you mad over a theory that's explaining the lived experiences of groups of people more than you are about changing the conditions in which the people live. You know what I mean? And so it goes back to this piece of this country loving the lies of white history more than loving Black people. So a historical analysis would tell me I should not be surprised. It is to be expected. But then this is where we have to engage in this radical imagination to think about how do we change this condition and this reality so our children and great grandchildren won't be having this same conversation. But no, I'm not surprised.
No, man, I love that. Dr. Greene, part of my work surprises a lot of Black people, but it surprises white people also, that the work of Justified Anger is really about developing pathways for allyship for non-Black folks, because I'm going to continue to invest in Black people. I lead a predominantly Black church. I'm a Black man. I'm part of a Black fraternity. So I have strong Black identity, but I understand that the people who still hold the keys to a lot of doors in society are folks who aren't Black. And so if they aren't getting the memos, if they aren't in discussion, and if we aren't finding a way to influence those influencers, we're kind of hitting our head up against the wall. So this Lean Into Allyship, Dr. Greene, grew out of Daniel and Samantha and others saying, if I just get some of my non-Black colleagues together, can you just talk straight with us and let us know what some of the next steps are? And we've been meeting ever since. I mean, we're probably coming up on, is it a year or two? Daniel said time has gone by so quickly. But I think it's coming up on 2 years, because I think we have an opportunity to win over folks who don't want to be led by fear. I feel just, the same way that the KKK went after white people who felt marginalized. First of all, it appealed to their white Christianity. Then it appealed to their economic instability. If we let them vote, if we let them get land, they're going to be living right next to you. And then doggone it, they're going to want to just come in and marry your girls and rape them and, have them cheering with them and all this kind of stuff, with fear that they're going to catch up to us and they're going to take our life away from us. We have an opportunity through my podcast, through your podcast, we're going to talk about later, through this venue. We have a chance of speaking to non-Black people who are saying, I don't want to get sucked into that hole. I don't want to buy that garbage. I need something that I can sink my teeth into that helps me to prepare myself and be grounded in understanding what is the true history of this. So what I've been doing in February is reminding anyone, listen, if you want to understand America, if you want to be truly patriotic, if you want to, really talk about who we are as a nation, you've got to look at all of our history. And so tonight we get a chance to speak freely with each other about the opportunity for non-Black people to just say, okay, I'm going to read, I'm going to watch, I'm going to listen to podcasts. I'm going to do something in February that will hopefully last throughout the year. We don't want just people just doing this just for February, but it's an opportunity for non-Black people to begin to understand, not us. This is what James Baldwin said. James Baldwin basically said, oh, you don't understand the plight of the Negroes? Well, then you don't understand whiteness. You don't understand America. You don't understand yourselves. So we're saying to our folks, don't lean into Black history so you can come and tell us that you're reading Coates or you're reading bell hooks. Like, don't read it so you can come and name drop with us. Do it so that you understand yourselves. Is that fair to say, Dr. Greene?
That's more than fair to say. And you said so many things that sparking ideas here. So one of the things I talk about in my class is to move beyond this hierarchy of wokeness, right? There's this thing I found with Black people, white folk, where people always have to one up you on what they know, right? So I've studied with so-and-so, I've gotten training from so-and-so, and they use that as credibility to rank themselves higher on this hierarchy and then look at you like you ain't been doing what you need to do, right? And so I think there is this urge to engage in that hierarchy of wokeness instead of thinking about how do we constantly, particularly white people, how do white people constantly live in a state of awakening, right? Understanding the ing, that this is always ever present, something that you're engaged in. But you said something else though about the fears, and it made me think about this idea of the lies of white fears, right? This white history is predicated on so many lies, which is the reason why you need to understand history, right? You talk about like white folks saying, well, if Black folks get in power, well, they're going to do this, they're going to take our stuff, and they're going to take our money. If you understood history, if you understood the 13 or 14 years of Reconstruction, when Black people started to assimilate a degree of power in this country, Black people didn't go and reinscribe an institution of slavery on white people who had enslaved them. They didn't go and set up. We didn't go and set up systems of segregation of what white people had done to us. And so when you don't understand history, it's almost akin to a racehorse with blinders on. You can see narrowly, but there's an entire world on the other side of that which is enclosed in your vision. And so this is why history is so important, because you cannot continue to go around with half-truths and false realities. And when you go around with half-truths and false realities, you engage in practices that are not only destructive for you, but is destructive for the people that you're in community with. So for an example, if thing that just came to my mind is if you just bought a new car and I was trying to teach you how to maintain your car, and I told you that you need to make sure that you continue to refuel your car with gasoline, because if your car runs out of gas, then you won't be able to go anywhere. Now, if that's the only knowledge that you have, that is true, but you also can't run out of oil, because if you run out of oil, your engine gonna lock up. But if the only truth that you're functioning out of is that I can't run out of gas, you're gonna be destructive to that car and the people that you may support in that car, because it's not gonna be able to run because you have a false sense of reality and a half-truth. And that is why we need to understand history, because history allows us to see the beauty, the pain, the agency, the domination, the triumph that informs our current day reality, but it's also so instructive to where we've been. And if we want to engage in that radical reimagination, we have to understand the ways in which history informs this current moment and what we can do otherwise moving forward.
Definitely, man, definitely. So non-Blacks who engage full U.S. history, including Black history, can't do so to name drop or one up Black people or other non-Black people. They've got to do it to free themselves and to open up their own understandings of how this country was structured. I love what you said about the 12 and 13 years of Reconstruction, because if we were really that vindictive, we would have Nat Turnered all over white behinds all over this country. We would have just Nat Turnered,
Denmark VC'd them, everybody.
Yeah, we could have. I mean, Black women could have smothered white babies while they were forced to breastfeed them. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't Black people with issues, but as a people, sure, that's not what we're operating out of. Because if we wanted to be vengeful, we would have been vengeful. Mm-hmm. So it's important to understand that. So someone is saying this is what they're going to do. And my thing is, if you didn't do anything but really help people, if we were really built for tough, hard slave labor, then people that need to be afraid about what we're going to do if they freed us. If I hire someone and then they decide not to work for me anymore, or they get a better job, we shouldn't be afraid of each other. I give them a job, they have another opportunity, we're going to throw them a little party, we're going to give them some cake, give them a good reference and say thank you. Why are people so afraid if they didn't do anything wrong? I'm not afraid of people I didn't do anything wrong to.
Yep.
So and again, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you go.
Because no, you got me thinking about, we don't even have to go back to Reconstruction. We can go back. I went to a historically Black college, as you said. Mm-hmm. When Black folks had historically Black colleges, and we still do, we didn't exclude white folks from coming in there. We didn't exclude Latinx folks from coming in there. We exclude Asian folks coming there. Like the goal has never been to dismantle this system to create another system of oppression. That ain't never been what Black folks have been on. Even if you look at the Black nationalists, even if you look at any Black quote unquote radical groups. And here's the thing: who gets to determine what's radical and what's not radical? Is it not radical that J. Edgar Hoover in Counterintelligence Protocol went and killed every Black institution and organization that was trying to be self-sufficient, not to get back and repay white America for what it had done to us, but so that we could live and thrive and be who God had called us to be? And so, this is why history is so important. And history will help to debunk the lies of white fears, right? And this is part of why there's this all-out assault and attack for it not to be taught in schools. But here's the thing: racism, white supremacy is not neutral, right? So just because you're not explicitly teaching about critical race theory, by default, you are teaching white history and white narratives, because that system has been set up such that—
and promoting it, teaching it and promoting it.
And the system is set up such that if you got to have quote unquote Black studies or quote unquote ethnic studies as an elective, then if that's an add-on or an elective, but you maintain your same history courses that are teaching that same old white supremacy, that in and of itself is a function and a manifestation of institutional racism and white supremacy.
So that means the higher institutions of learning, the revered universities, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the University of Texas at Austin, these organizations are culpable in having these classes that perpetuate this white supremacy while making these other courses elective, so that it can appear we're being open, we're being fair, we're looking at all different perspectives. But who gets to call that shot? And why do we get 2 ethnic studies courses and hundreds of Western civilization and ancient history and all these other kinds of media, all these other things that people get to learn, man. Yeah. I was thinking, Dr. Greene, for us, a historical perspective, when we look at it historically, so much of our history we knew, our history of transcendence and perseverance, because when we were in separate but equal schools and had Black teachers, many of whom had advanced degrees because they wanted to be botanists and biologists and chemists, but the companies wouldn't hire them. So we had good teachers with master's degrees teaching us. And when the idea came to integrate we lost those teachers who taught us our history. We went to white schools where they weren't trained in U.S. Black history. They didn't know our attribute. All they knew is we were messing up their life, messing up their classrooms, and now the military is called out, and the National Guard are called out to bring us into their schools. We were high achievers. When we had separate but equal schools, I heard, I'm trying to remember who quoted this, on a per capita basis, when Black people could only go to HBCUs mainly, the percentage of Black accountants, Black nurses, Black doctors, Black pharmacists that we were producing in those Black institutions far soared above what we saw in predominantly white institutions. And so even the lie that white institutions saved us from our torn, tattered books and our raggedy classrooms, it's destroying the lie that when we loved our kids and taught our kids, we taught them to excel and to not hate white people. We were producing not only scholars, but citizens. Whereas the other systems were teaching that we came here to take their women and take their land and take stuff from them. They were promoting, many of them were promoting system of injustice while we were learning how to really be human and be smart.
Yeah, yep. Amen, everything you said. And sorry if you hear a crying 2-year-old in the background.
No, man, that's all part of it.
We're just chopping it up.
Let me ask you, is it accidental that most white students aren't taught U.S. history? I mean, I know that's a rhetorical question, but because people aren't here listening, like, why didn't we learn this? As if you teach Black history, which is a subset of U.S. history, because there are Black people in the room. But is it accidental? What's the process or the thought behind why you can go to great schools, private school, and get to college, get to our U.S. Black history course, and be in your 50s and raise your hand and say, how was I never taught this? I've had people in our Black history class, Dr. Greene, we've now taken 3,500 non-Black people through our U.S. Black history course. And we have people raising their hands saying, I'm a history teacher at a high school, and I've never heard about the Harlem Renaissance. I've never heard this information before. How does that happen?
It happens by an intentional design. So Carter G. Woodson said something that was so profound. He said there are two types of educations, the one that they give you and the one that you give yourself. And so the one that they give you is the one that is set up from its origins, from the foundation of public schooling in this country and even abroad and globally in some places. It is one to set up, to maintain, and to perpetuate white normativity, white supremacy, and it is also one of extraction, to extract your Black brilliance. How do you get precocious Black kids going to school, and then they, just through going through the institution of schooling, not even excited about school and learning no more? Like, you already a scientist. What you talking about? You understand how to wash dishes? That's science. You understand how you know what I mean? That, like, it's all around you, but it's the one that they give you. The thing that we have to do agentically and with our agency is we have to give ourselves another education and or rebuild a system that is centered on truth and truths around how this works. And so I always like to differentiate between schooling and education. Schooling is an institution that teaches you your place in society. Education teaches you to transform society, right? And so in schooling ain't never gonna give you an education about Black history and the contributions of Black people to this country, because there would be no country without Black folks. And so that's why white people in particularly have to engage on this education piece, the one that you give yourself. And part of it too is, listen, I got enough trying to navigate and figure out how to continue to live my life. I don't have the capacity to sit down and create an education for white people, right? And so there is that giving yourself that education that you have to engage in for white people. And another thing, real quickly, made me think about this beautiful illustration that Dr. Beverly Tatum gives, who was the former president of Spelman College, has wrote many amazing books. you make me think about this whole thing about allyship, about how we enter as allies, but I like to say you're committed to being a co-laborer, right? And so she gives this beautiful example of, imagine people walking on this escalator, and this escalator is going in this particular direction. And she said there are 4 types of people on the escalator. There's one type of folks that are on the escalator and they like the direction it's going, because the direction it's going is beneficial to them. It upholds everything that they have, and that's where they want to go, no matter what nobody else is doing. So they're going to keep going that direction. She said there's a second group of people who realize that the direction that the escalator, the moving walkway, so to speak, like at an airport.
Moving sidewalk, yeah.
The moving sidewalk. The second group of people realize that the moving sidewalk is going in a direction that's not good, and they just kind of stop. But they're still going in the same direction, right? So they're not actively doing anything against it. They're not actively resisting it, but their inactivity is still activity towards that same direction, right? So they're not actively moving forward, but they're standing on something that is systematically designed to go in a particular direction. And then there's a third group of people who say, you know what? This mug is crazy. I ain't even gonna keep going this way. They turn around and they start progressing in the opposite direction, right? They're actually actively they're crawling, they're walking, they're being wheeled in an opposite direction. But I think there's actually an additional group of people.
I do too. Who are they? Who are they, Dr. Greene?
I think there's an additional group of people who actually are trying to find the circuit breakers and the power cords, and they're ready to cut the power on this whole thing, because they realize that this mug, in order for us really to live collectively in here, we've got to dismantle this and build something radically different, right? So it is not enough to stop and say, I don't like the direction that this walkway is going. It's not enough to even turn around and go into the opposite direction. There has to be a collective agency of folks to figure out where in the world is the power source so they can cut that cord, so we can cut this mug off for good. But you know why people don't want to do that, Pastor G? Because if I cut the power source, if white people cut the power source off, they're implicated in that. And that now requires them to radically reimagine in community what Black folks, what could be instead. And the biggest, the most difficult, the most egregious thing that people can do is to cut the cord and try to rebuild that which we have come from, because that's all they know. And so this requires us also to go through this metamorphosis in this individual, in this collective inner transformation, so that when we go to build something new, we're not just building a relic of what we had in the past.
Damn. I just want people to think about that, because sometimes in this space, we just start talking because it's time to do the next thing. I want people to think about what you're saying. That's what woke looks like. That's what waking or an awakening looks like. It looks like looking for the power source. Because what people need to understand is that if that escalator or that moving sidewalk continues to go, we're about to see that it's causing destruction for their children. That I think people who are woke are trying to make the world better for me. King's work wasn't just for his children. He understood what happened to the children of oppressors. He understood what that was going to mean for their soul and the compassion that it was going to drain out of them. And so this is why we need non-Black people, particularly white people, learning about U.S. Black history, because if you understand what got the moving sidewalk going and the blood, the loss of blood that it took, and the loss of Black lives and Black babies and the brutality that's taken place, there's no way that a true woke person, there's no way that a true ally could keep riding on that and being perfectly fine with it. There's no way that they really can. And you got to want it enough, friends, to get on the internet, to go on websites, Google Black history, because it's out there. You don't show that you're woke by asking Black people to tutor you or to let you know when you say something racist or insensitive, but you got to dive in a real meaningful way so that you keep going back to it and feeding throughout the year. Because when you're woke, we will know because the sidewalk stops moving. The moving sidewalk stops moving because somebody's going to cut it, allow themselves, like Dr. Greene is saying, to be implicated in that, because that's where true transformation takes place. We think that people are afraid of history. White people are afraid of history because it's going to make them feel badly. I don't think, I think it's more than that, because it may be hard to feel bad about what someone may or may not have done in your family 150 years ago. But I think what people feel bad about is that someone is saying, find the damn pliers, find the circuit breaker, turn it, turn it off, turn the whole thing off, and then see how your community responds or how friends respond. I think that that's the real thing of why people are trying to find the circuit breaker of talking about Black history, because it's implicating a lot of folks, and it's unveiling how so many of these systems have been structured. And gentlemen like the two of us, or our scholars who love history, we don't want to get stuck in it. We're not trying to be in a time warp, friends. We want people to look back, because that's when you get motivated to do more and do better. It is too easy to be inebriated with modern conveniences and technology at your fingertips and all of these things that we can do from the comfort of a computer or a smart device. We can drive, and not even put our hands on the wheel. Like, there's so many things that we can do. And if we don't look back, it's easy for us to believe the lie that we've worked harder, we're smarter, we applied ourselves, our families were intact. And so we're inviting people to make U.S. history your history, so that you understand the opportunity you have to make this different for your children. Dr. Greene, can you talk a little bit more about what the benefit is of non-Blacks learning U.S. Black history? Because people think we just want them to do it for ourselves, but what's the benefit for the souls of white folks or Asian folks, Latinx folks, if they study U.S. history?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a thought about that, but you said something that was so important about, just jumping in. And one of the things that I often, one of my common refrains in class is that you don't learn how to swim by sitting on the side of the pool. You know what I mean? You don't learn how to swim by reading books about swimming. I mean, like, you can read the books, but when you read the books and you actually swim, now when you go and read it again, you have this experiential knowledge that augments this theoretical knowledge that you have about reading. You don't learn how to swim by even critiquing the pool. Well, the pool should have had a shallow end. Well, the pool didn't have this color in it. The concrete was wrong. Like, you actually have to get in to learn how to swim. But in terms of your question, the comment that I really want to say.
Say it. Listen, you.
Yeah, I mean,
these expressions are your own. They're not those of the University of Texas, Austin. What do you really want to say, Black man? What do you really want?
They're not. Yeah, they're not the comments of the University of Texas at Austin, which, Texas was so segregated and so anti-Black that
how segregated was it?
This university created a separate law school for Black people before they will let Black people come to UT Austin, right? And so I think understanding that history is important, because the past is the present, right? The present is the past future, and it is the past of the future. I might have got them backwards, but you say, like, the past of the present is here with us. To your original question, though, you ask about the souls, what's at stake and stuff like that. And my initial reaction is, there are many times I wonder if white folks have souls when you understand the history. And I know that seems stark and that seems grim. But it's amazing to me, even in 2020, when, all these white people were, and I wrote this op-ed called "This Movement is About Black Freedom, Not White People's Comfort and Feelings." It was amazing that all of a sudden, what Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, like, white people had this newfound realization. And it was, on one hand, I was grateful, but on the other hand, I was deeply grieved, because why does Black death always have to be why does Black death always have to be what has to be consumed for white people to engage in this work? And then the other thing is, like, from 1619 on, and even before that, there's all this Black death happening, and so you just got to have so much Black death, and that has to be your justification for why you engage in this work. And that when you initially said that, it made me question the soul sometime of white folks, and the fetish that white liberal fantasies have with Black death, which has to be a justification. That's the word I was looking for. Like, Black death has to be a justification to do something. All right, now we get to see this public lynching of George Floyd, which, again, if you understood history, you will understand Mary Turner. You will understand, most people don't know Mary Turner. These 13 folks in 13 days, Black folks had gotten lynched down in Georgia. And Mary Turner, who was 19 years old, went to him and said, this ain't right. We're going to have some justice. She was pregnant at the time. They lynched Mary Turner, burned her. They lynched her. They burned her upside down. And then they split her belly open and they stumped the baby that was in their belly. Right. And so when you understand this stuff, you start to say, and then when you see the kneeling on George Floyd's neck, you start to wonder, like, where are y'all soulless? You know what I mean? But this is why you got to understand history. So that was my initial reaction. And so why is this is important for white folk, for non-Black people? It is important because I don't see any other ways to radically build a future that works for Black people to thrive first and foremost, and for non-Black people, if we don't have a ongoing reckoning with the historical realities that shape our everyday present realities that we have in our society. And the last thing I'll say is this. Oftentimes people get enamored and so just moved by the magnificent display of racial injustice, but they're often silent on the everyday mundane ways in which racial injustice and racism shows up. And so, yeah, those are my initial thoughts. And, you know, everybody who watching that ain't Black, is really a deep honor and privilege for you to listen to a conversation where two Black people are just going to speak freely,
exactly,
and allowing you to come in here. So yeah,
exactly, because this is real Black space and Black speak in a public forum. And what I love about what you're saying, Dr. Greene, not that it requires translation, but I'll just say to folks, it's not saying that by virtue of being of European descent, people are born without souls. It's saying the social construct of soulness, you sell your soul in being white so that babies, it's what fuels the machine that allows you to slice a baby out of a mother's stomach and stump it. It's the freedom and the silence that was purchased to kneel on a George Floyd, that part of being white and having the good life and the access to pools and college and education and being poor and still being able to go from rags to riches. The cost of whiteness, the benefit of it has meant that these things are perpetuated. And so what we want you to understand is this is a wake-up call, folks. It's a wake-up call. This is 400 years of hell on American soil. And so the space isn't created to say attaboy, attagirl for being here. The space is not just saying you're changing the world by being here. We're trying to make a clarion call for the sake of your own souls, for the sake of how and what you will model for your children. Children will watch that. There's no way you can value life and you watch what happens to a baby when a woman's lynched upside down. I remember hearing that story, or one like it, when I was in the Afro-Am department many years ago, and I was actually taking that class with my mother. And she got the respect of the whole class. And she said, I'm tired of you talking about what white people did to Black people. She said to the professor, William Vandenberg, the department chair, I need you to tell me what is going on in the minds of white people to think that they could do that, and how have y'all changed since then? She just took control of that whole room by asking, like, stop making this pornographic. Don't just turn this into a bunch of voyeurs. Like, oh my God, they cut the. No. Let's not talk about what happened to her. How do you do that in front of your wife and then go home with her? How do you do that and not have her lose respect for you? How do you do that in front of your sons and your daughters and not think that they have just lost the sense of value? So, Dr. Greene,
go to church.
We're going to keep talking. Go to church. Yeah.
Go to church
and do the collection.
Go to church.
That I'm telling you. So what Dr. Greene is really saying here, you all, the privilege of speaking into this space is to ask yourselves, what the hell am I doing? Am I riding the escalator, the moving sidewalk? Am I just complaining about it? Am I moonwalking on it and going the other direction? Or am I looking for the power plug? Because people have not looked for the power cord, here we are. Here we are in 2022. So Dr. Greene, people want to ask you questions directly. So I'm going to step back a bit. Daniel and Samantha are coming in. We about to say something, sir?
I was going to say real quickly, I think an important thing too is to realize this question: where is my work, right? And where are my communities whom I work with? Because cutting the power cord for me is in education. You know what I mean? That's where my locus of folk, but that's the question that people have to wrestle with. Like, where is my work with what communities do I work with? And where my fuse box, right? And where are because a lot of times I think people, they feel so overwhelmed because they're thinking about these structural transformations and they negate the contextual interventions that they can have. And so all the time when I'm in class and people feel overwhelmed, they way out into structural transformation. Well, the Secretary of Education did this. Well, they doing it. I'm like, okay, your classroom is actually a system, right? You got 30 babies that you're in front of. Like, don't negate cutting the power circuit there and reimagining what you can do there because you're so hungry and thirsty for this larger structural transformation. And this is where we have to have faith to realize that this work never has been or never will be solely predicated on us and what we do, but rather this is intergenerational. And this is work that we have to constantly engage in with our foremothers and forefathers and folks who are also doing this work. So figuring out those questions are like super important. And the last thing I would say is the tensions of this work and the contradictions of this work that are always present. And there are times that I don't even try to reconcile them, right? Because I that same statement that I just said about where the souls of white people, I also, at the contradictory part, there are questions that I teach in my class, don't freeze people in time, right? And so I believe both of those as a contradictory at the same time with all the tensions that are constantly waged in that. So.
And that's why you went down to Texas and got tenured, because you are a bad man. Daniel, Samantha, come on, because yeah.
I did not want to cut you off, Dr. Greene. Thank you for the passion you've been sharing throughout this entire event. And we are looking at the Q&A. I can tell you've given the audience a lot to think about. And I can tell you've already received honor and huge respect to you, Dr. Greene. A comment came in, so I wanted to share that with you as well. There's a lot of appreciation for your time tonight and just telling it how it is. There were a couple questions that I'll kind of group together. Back to when you talked about, when we talk about it's not shared in school, it's the education you have to give yourself centered around the truths. And Marlene had a question about what are your views on the belief that, history is written through the perception of the author. Therefore, you must read it in the context of the author's experience and intent. And then kind of joining that to what Sarah just input is, where do we even begin? Homeschooling and just probably more for the next generation of teaching. So kind of just grouping that together based on how you, educate yourself.
Yeah, so great question. Great question. So I'm thinking of three things. One is kind of contextual to set up this. One is that I believe always when we're engaged in this stuff that we have to engage in truth and grace. If we only engage in truth, potentially it can be alienating, but if we only engage in grace, it can lead to complacency. So we have to hold the tensions of truth and grace together. In terms of, where do we begin and where do we start this work? I think you start where you are, but you don't stay there, right? You start where you are. You start. So I used to use this thing in class around circle of control, circle of influence, and circle of things you cannot control. And so the circle of things that I can't control, I'm concerned about them, but I can't influence or control them right now. Or if I could, the energy that will be expended for me will cause me to displace what I have right now. And so, yes, I think we should also think about the circle of influence, but I think what is in my control where I can directly have an impact on it. And sometimes what's in that immediate circle of control is yourself, right? And so I think you start where you are, or, given the profession you're in. Do you work in business? Do you work in law? Do you work in public service? I think you start with a community of people, right? And so you start where you are, as Rich Milner's book says, but you don't stay there, right? So I think that's where you start. And so it's contextual. So the questions you need to be asking is like, where do I have a sense of power to make things happen, right? With whom do I have influence? What resources can I broker to start cutting the power source, right? So I actually think this work starts with questions more than it starts with answers. And even the root of the word question is quest. It sends you on this journey. And oftentimes people, so yeah, that's where I think you start to that question. Sorry, don't get too bogged down there. The other part of what was the other part of the question, Dan?
Well, first of all, never apologize for your answer. And second of all, it was more of just, history is usually given through the context of the author, and through the lens of the author. That's and right, so, just giving your thoughts on that as people are educating themselves, how do they factor that in? Probably from the sources that they're getting it, the credibility, and obviously who's writing the context.
Yeah. So this is where I think we have to engage in a type of critical pedagogy. When I say critical pedagogy, I'm thinking of a type of a pedagogy that questions, right? So the questions becomes like, who wrote this? Whose voices are not included? What's the rest of the story? Whose stories are not being told? And this is why being a teacher that understands instruction from like critical perspectives, you can, I'm doing this with my 5-year-old daughter now. It's almost like find the lies and the deception in this stuff that you're talking about. Because she came home talking about Rosa Parks. And I'm like, did they talk about the Women's Political Council? Don't, because like this is a half truth, right? So she's 5 years old in kindergarten, right? And so part of it is we have to ask the critical questions of the text. And when we ask the critical questions of the text of, what's missing? Who's not included? Who wrote it? Why did they wrote it? To what right they write it? To what ends did they write it? I think that is a place to start. And we can do that with the current curriculum, right? We can do that with the books that Pearson has put out and whatever other book publisher has put out. We can do that right now. It's asking the critical questions of the text to allow that which has been veiled to be uncovered.
And Daniel, here, Dr. Greene, we have been able to find resources and vet them on our Nehemiah website. So Don will probably drop a link in, but movies you can watch, books you can read, articles you can read. We have spent countless of hours putting materials together so people have a place to go. So start there. So you don't have to worry about the authors. No one's perfect, but you look for consistency as well. And we've got materials that are out there. Ask friends, put things out, take a look on the, follow people, find out what they're reading, Google Black authors. But you can start by looking on our website.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. G. And definitely deserving of a shout out, Don, who Dr. G just referenced, but he does so much work for us alongside all of these events, all of the resources that you're seeing shared in the chat consistently throughout each and every one of our sessions are all done by him. So just a huge shout out to him for all of the work that he does in support of these events. He's always kind of a silent force behind the session. So just want to make sure to show him some much deserved love. This question would be for either of you, but Dr. Greene, especially, we have heard you talk about the power sources several times throughout the conversation tonight, and with the moving sidewalk analogy. Sarah, who's one of our participants this evening, has been really involved and engaged in the Q&A, and she is wondering if you can talk a little more about specifying some of those different power sources and any thoughts you have around those.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think power sources are mechanisms that allow for institutions to control groups of people, right? So when I think about power sources, I think about money is a source of power. When I think about power sources, I think about knowledge, types of knowledge that is put out and purported to be normal. I think about that as a power source. When I think about power sources, I think about relationships, the ways in which we relate to each other, right? Do we try to work with, this is the thing, like white people have to speak up, but not speak over, right? To me, speaking up is power over, but I'm sorry, speaking up is power with, but speaking over is power over, right? So essentially, like they're two different dynamics of how we relate to one another, but they're all predicated on the way in which power is related. So those are the three initial things I know we come into time that come to mind: knowledge, the way we relate to one another, and money as sources of power. Dr. G, I don't know if you had something.
No, man, I can't add anything to that. That was great.
And I think and I think to your point, Dr. Greene, we will probably just have time for one more question before we jump over to some volunteer activities or donations. But we did have a question actually that we were thinking of before the event, of just with Black History Month coming up, what are, for non-Black allies who can celebrate that in ways that are genuine, how do they avoid the perfectionism trap or the imposter syndrome, worrying about perceived appropriation? How do you encourage or challenge would-be allies to just do it anyway and get involved with all of those fears that I just mentioned?
Yeah, I think then I think that's a barometer or indicator that you're actually doing the work if you're actually asking some of those questions. And I think that's one of the tension for white people, because on some days I'm like, don't talk about Black history. Why y'all ain't talking about Black history? Well, y'all should have had it front and center. Why y'all had, and so I think the ongoing and being okay with that, the ongoing shifting and tensions and contradictions that show up in it, and even for someone to be questioning that, I mean, I think that means they're in the work. Excuse me. This is where I think being in community with people are so important. I was just talking not too long ago to folks about self-care, and then I said, well, how do we start to think about communities of care, right? So how do we move it beyond like the individual to this larger collective? And so I think folks should do this, of course, individually, but I think they should start thinking about how do you engage with Black history in community, but also recognize that there will be the danged if I do and danged if I don't. That's part of doing this work. And I'll close on this because I know we are going time. You just make me think of this. My wife, my life partner, one of her best friends that she met in kindergarten, her little sister was out with a group of friends, and they were at a bonfire, and there was this big bonfire there, and the fire was about 2 or 3 feet deep. So the fire's up, is like 6 or 7 of them. They're standing around the fire, and the little sister accidentally slipped and she fell in the fire. It was horrific. It was horrible. She got burned very badly. And one of the friends on the side literally jumped into the fire to get the little sister out. And it was a horrific incident. And what that friend did to me illustrates what I think about this co-laboring piece. You're willing to, I mean, this literally happened. You're literally willing to jump in the fire. And when you jump in, when that person got out the fire, they also had the scars, so to speak, that they were in the fire with the little sister. And part of this work will require you to figuratively jump in the fire. It'll cause you to be bruised. It will cause your reputation to take some hits potentially. It will cause that, but the bond that was created between those two is something that is untouchable, right? And so as we think about this work, we have to be, white allies have to be willing to jump into this with us, and we figure out how do we get out of this collectively so that we can build a radically different world.
Hey, Daniel, let me just say, one, Dr. Greene, that was a beautiful analogy, and it shows that whoever jumped in the fire saw value in that little girl's life. And so they did it not just to be heroic, but because the world would be so remiss without it. That's where true relationships are built. Cross-cultural relationships aren't built around talking about it. It's understanding that people who have really tight relationships, cross-cultural, they've jumped in and out of fire, in and out of water, in front of bullets for each other. And if people want the benefit of that kind of bond, they need to know really what it costs. I love that analogy, but I can value that person saying, we're not going to have this world without that little girl. I'm going to get in there to get her out. And that's touching, and that's what it's going to require.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. G. And thank you both for doing the work for me in segueing to the next the next content that we want to cover in the event. As we commit ourselves, beyond allies to being co-laborers, as Dr. Greene says, we are really excited to welcome Siobhan Jackson, Nehemiah's new Director of Mobilization, to join us to highlight a few of the really excellent and impactful education and volunteer opportunities that we have upcoming through Nehemiah and a new offering. Thank you, Siobhan.
Thank you so much for the glowing introduction. Just wanted to relay some very vital and wonderful information. As you can see, we've got a couple of more donation-heavy asks for our community today. We're trying to give everybody that needs a little bit of help to keep their home in order with all of our donations, as you can see on that random acts poster there. If you have any questions about material donations, please go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, and to get more information about any material donations, because we'll also be having opportunities for volunteering your time as well posted there. The last thing I'd say is, unfortunately, our course, Black History for a New Day with Justified Anger, has just closed, but we encourage you, please, again, go to our website and poke around. And if you are interested in taking that course, there will be an opportunity in the fall. So just give us an email at justifiedanger@nehemiah.org, and we'll definitely help you out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siobhan. And I hate that the hour has come and gone so quick, Dr. Greene. I did not want to hear you stop talking. And I know I said don't take notes, but I have 2 pages of notes throughout what you were sharing. So thank you. And I do want to close up the event. And really what we always highlight, right, is that allyship's a verb. And if you've been at previous events, you've heard about Dr. G talk about the 3 pillars of allyship, of educating, donating, and affiliating. But I do want to stress a couple things that Dr. Greene stressed as well, and Samantha, you just hit on about be a co-laborer, cut the power source to radically rebuild something new. And then focus on that awakening, not always about being woke, through consistent education and action. And so, again, start with questions. And really where this gets into is our Ally in Action Challenge. So at the end of every event, we want you to take a very tangible action. And at this situation, or at the end of this event, we want you to really focus on the education pillar of our country's history through the lived experience and the lens of Dr. G and his family's history. And there's actually a documentary that Don will drop into the chat where you'll learn about his family lineage, and then watch the second Lean Into Allyship that we ever had, because you'll hear Dr. G actually talk about that experience and go much deeper than even what the documentary was able to do. And if you've already watched it, watch it again and share it with a friend. I think, as Dr. Greene said, as you've been involved in the work since the second event, you'll probably see something different or have a new epiphany as you're reviewing it. So please take that time. And as Siobhan just mentioned on our next slide here, Justified Anger, as Dr. G kicked off the event, in that Black history is U.S. history. I cannot stress enough to get on the wait list for this fall course. It's an incredible course. I know it's definitely in an online fashion now. So regardless if you're in the Madison area or outside, you'll have access to it. It's an incredibly powerful course, and one of the most powerful courses I've ever taken as well. As Siobhan also mentioned, join the Nehemiah newsletter. And then just wanted to give a plug for the Black Like Me podcast that I know Dr. G spoke about earlier, but also I saw Don drop this in the chat. Listen to Dr. Greene's Radically Just Schools. Listen to that podcast as well. You now have something else to listen to beyond what we've been sharing in past events. And so, as you saw a couple slides ago, the next event is on February 22nd. Dr. G, do you want to give any bit of a teaser? We'll be covering the center that will be coming in Madison, but any teaser for what you'll be covering in that event, or do you want to make them wait to come?
This is a Beltline view of a historic facility that's going to be built in Madison South Side. It's the Center for Black Excellence and Culture. Nothing like this facility and the programs in it is currently taking place in this country. And I'm going to talk about this opportunity and what it means for all folks, particularly African Americans. And so I can't wait to talk about this in February. So please mark your calendars, get your friends on the Zoom call as well. This is going to be fantastic.
Awesome. And so then in the final closing, you will see an email from Justified Anger with the recording, all of this content as well. So you'll always have it. And just again, another thank you to Dr. Greene, Dr. G for being here, the planning committee for being able to put this together, as well as Siobhan and the generator for the technology as well, and for sharing the volunteer efforts. So with that, the event will come to a close. Thank you and have a good night.